either live by the gun or you die by the sword.
Welcome to The Good, the Bad, and the Weird. I'm Nicho.
And I'm Chris.
And today we have our next unintentional installment of our All-Star series. The bane of all recorder learners. James Cameron's 1997 Titanic.
Yeah, we originally knew it was going to be a big episode.
Yeah, we figured it'd be a long episode.
Yeah.
But as you know, when I first started doing any digging into this about a month ago, I had 5 pages of notes from just James Cameron's commentary. And that's when we're like, well, we got another All-Star series.
Yeah, so, you know.
It's fitting, though.
There's a reason this movie is what it is.
Exactly. And so, like, I was actually quite curious about going into this ourselves, because, one, both of us generally don't like romance movies.
No.
Hi, Charlie. You come to sync too?
Hi. This is early for you. But I was also curious because, just thinking back on it, we're kind of the generation that was there for the hype, but we also missed it because I was 6 when this movie came out.
We were here for Titanic's re-release in 3D.
I was not aware of it until learning about it later on. But, like, I personally didn't watch this movie until I was 20, almost 20, 21.
Well, and this is one of those movies that our parents saw, immediately deemed it a classic, must watch, but also they vividly remember the boob scene. And thus, a lot of parents were like, you cannot watch this movie until you're an adult.
Oh,
Despite the fact that, honestly, like, the little nudity that's in this movie, it's not that bad.
No, I mean,
it's some boobs that are getting drawn. We've covered worse.
It's kind of weird because, like, I'd seen Braveheart, but I had to close my eyes in Braveheart for that one scene.
Yeah.
But I was able to watch the rest of Braveheart.
Mm-hmm.
And same with, like, you know, I get it, but then I was allowed to watch, like, Alien.
Yeah, the line with Titanic was weirdly blurred. I think it was blurred mostly because there's scenes in this movie that hang so heavy in your memory, they stick with you so hard that they kind of envelop the whole movie accidentally. Like, you and I were starting this and you were like, hey, by the way, remember the halfway point of this movie? And I was like, yeah, it's this point. And you're like, no, it's not.
No. Yeah, because I was sitting there and I'm like, holy crap, this is a long movie. Like,
my husband legit thought it was a 2.5 hour long movie, and I was like, I think it's longer. He's like, no, it can't be. It's longer, guys.
It's barely short of Seven Samurai, and, like, Gone with the Wind's like 4 hours. Gone
with the Wind, you remember it being a hella long movie.
Yeah.
Like, that was part of it. Titanic, especially since I don't think a lot of people rewatch Titanic every single year. I'm sure when it came out, people did. Mm-hmm. Mostly because the 2 main actors. But now, I think a lot of people remember fondly the Titanic, and there's a lot of bits that your memory just conveniently leaves right out.
Yeah, and
or shortens quite a bit.
Yeah.
There's a lot of dialogue that my memory just kind of chucked right out the window.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, it is definitely a long movie, but it's...
Despite being a long movie and a romance movie, it's a nicely paced movie.
No, it's very well done. It doesn't ever feel like it drags, though. Like, there's always something going in the background. And I think part of that is due to the fact that how James Cameron put it is that he... we know what happens at the end of the movie, but we don't know what happens to Jack and Rose.
Exactly.
And I think that's the biggest thing that will go on.
Yeah.
Go on.
Yeah. Like the #1 selling album.
Yes. And to celebrate our unintentional all-star movie, Chris, what are we drinking today?
We went fancy and we bought ourselves bottom shelf champagne. So
pinkies up.
Pinkies up. Cheers.
Cheers.
Ooh, that's some bottom shelf champagne. Oh.
It could use some Sprite.
I'll finish it.
I will too.
It's not the worst one I've ever bought, but It's not the best one either. Ooh, there's a third aftertaste coming around.
I'm gonna smack your husband the next time I see him, because I know he picked this out.
My husband very, very willingly was like, I'll run in and grab some real quick. My husband is very much into, like, Googling things and researching anything before he buys anything. So he did some, like, 5-minute research in the car, went in and bought this, which is very different than how I buy champagne, which label is the cutest.
Yeah.
Which, when you're dealing with champagne, picking one based off of how nice you think the bottle looks.
Oh, wow. Shush.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how you should pick champagne, apparently, because everyone I've picked doesn't have this, suck aftertaste.
It's very sour.
Very sour. That's okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
I'll use it for something.
So,
I'm gonna pick you up.
Before we get into talking about the movie, I just want to first off acknowledge my resources for this movie, or my sources. Mm-hmm. Mainly, most of my information comes from 2005 commentary by James Cameron, and also commentary by various cast and crew members.
Same. That was a lot of video to watch.
Yes, and also commentary by Don Lynch and Ken Marshall, which they wrote the book An Illustrated History of the Titanic, which was part of the inspiration for this movie. Yep. As well as archival behind-the-scenes footage, interviews with cast and crew, and the beloved Wikipedia.
Yep, and I also watched the 2 documentaries that James Cameron helped make when he went down to go see the Titanic in person.
Yes, you went into a little bit more of the facts than I did.
Mostly because I'd already seen them, to be honest with you. I watched the documentaries about the Titanic way before ever seeing this movie, which... Now that I think about it, I also went to the Titanic Museum in Branson, Missouri, way before I ever saw this movie as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, and yeah, same here, because I went to the traveling museum as well, and I learned My Heart Will Go On in guitar class.
Yes. I think they played that song kind of on repeat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So, before we get into it, I do want to go over a little bit about the Titanic as well, just because when we were talking about doing this, we kind of forgot how old the story of Titanic is.
Yeah, and also how much of a freaking nerd James Cameron is.
Oh my god, he is the biggest fucking nerd for this.
Biggest fucking shipwreck nerd on this planet, which... is a lot to watch for a documentary / his, like, listening to his commentary. However, what it produced was a film that is beautifully historically accurate in some aspects.
Yeah, and one thing I actually appreciate about what he did, because in the commentary he mentions that he doesn't like commentaries because the film should speak for itself.
Which I get, but also, like...
He did it for people like us who want to know more.
Yeah. And honestly, there are parts of this movie that I know friends and just people in general have not heard his point on. And I know he knows that those views about certain lines and certain scenes are out there only because you can think to yourself, like, this is blatantly obvious until you try and tell it to someone else, and then they take a slightly different approach. So as much as I understand what he was trying to go for with this masterpiece, I do think understanding some of his background and his thought process is really helpful for some parts of Titanic. Yes,
and I'll get into that when we actually talk about the movie a bit, because he is very open about what he did not get right either, because which I highly appreciate too.
I do too, because Titanic is held as a very historically accurate portrayal movie.
Accurate and also... detailed. Like the pinnacle romance movie, too.
Yes, very much so. And a historically accurate film that also did incredibly well, and everyone has seen. Which, those two worlds don't normally overlap.
And fused fiction with it, too.
And it did so in a way that was believable.
Exactly.
So, yeah, it was helpful to hear parts from him that, you know, as we'll go over, he either would have changed or would have worded better.
Yeah. And so, just a brief overview of the Titanic, or the RMS Titanic.
The actual ship.
Yep. It was the largest passenger liner of its time at 882 feet 9 inches.
Now, to be clear, it is the exact same size as its sister ship. It is heavier than her sister. Because the really rich dude who was on it, requested a couple of changes to the layout.
Okay.
So the restaurants, the ballrooms, slightly different, thus the extra weight.
Yeah.
That's where she gets her title. Okay.
Yeah, she was also 170 feet high from keel to the top of the funnels. Mm-hmm. Supposed to be unsinkable, but on April 15th, 1912, it sunk after hitting an iceberg, and an estimated 2,224 passengers and crew aboard died.
Yes.
Or, of the 2,224 passengers aboard, only 1,500 died.
And to help bring that into perspective for modern people, mm-hmm. She was by far, her and her sister were by far the largest ships to cruise at the time.
Oh, yeah.
She was so long that she takes up 3 New York City blocks. Which, now that you know how long she is, you can see how in old-timey times, which is when she was built and when people were sailing, that would be the equivalent of sailing around in a small city.
Yeah.
Something that didn't happen.
Yeah.
So I could understand how people legit thought she was unsinkable.
Yeah, no, exactly. It was a feat of modern engineering at the time.
Yes.
But it also ended up being the largest peacetime commercial disaster. Like I said, we feel like the Titanic is such a modern event, but this happened before World War II. This
boat sinking is so old that it helped create the rules that we currently have.
Oh, yeah.
Because they didn't have any of these standards that nowadays we think of as like, no shit, Sherlock.
Yeah, like for us architecturally, the Chicago fire changed everything code-wise, and all because of insurance companies, but that's another story.
We will put that in the architectural fire rant category.
Yes. And to put a little bit of perspective at the time, a little bit of history that was going on at the same time too, because I've been liking to put like things that are happening at the same time.
It helps a lot.
It does, but it also doesn't, because it's like, oh, I've seen stuff on this, but it feels so much older. Like the Republic of China was just 3 months old when the Titanic sank.
Women could not vote when the Titanic sank.
Exactly. Kim Il-sung, founder of North Korea, was born on the same day the Titanic sunk.
Yeah.
Emperor Meiji of Japan died, ending the Meiji era. It doesn't feel that old, does it?
It doesn't, but at the same time, when you like sit there and think about it to yourself and like really put it into context with not just American time period and what was happening, because I think American history, we have a bad habit of shortening our history real short.
Oh, yeah.
Which makes it feel like everything was either way long ago or like just yesterday. When you put it into world context, it's kind of mind-blowing that all of this still can feel relevant.
Yeah, well, and to put it into American perspective, Arizona had become the 48th state that year, and Alaska had just become a territory.
Like, we hadn't even put people over in Alaska permanently.
Nope. And in the world of pop culture and film, Universal Studios and Manufacturing Company is founded.
Yep.
Tarzan appeared in his first book, Tarzan of the Apes.
Yep. Not movie, book.
Yep. Julia Childs was born.
Yeah, bless Julia Childs.
Side little architecture thing, also linked to a horrific event. Japanese-American architect and designer of the World Trade Centers, Minoru Yamasaki, is born.
Wow. Yeah, that does make timelines feel weird, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one other little bit of thing. This is still before the modern language of cinema or narrative stories has been invented with, unfortunately, The Birth of a Nation.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's weird. I mean, we don't really think about it. Like, we haven't even really seen a true skyscraper at this point.
Yeah, no. When, like, city blocks still were dominated by horses.
Exactly.
Like, that's the level of old-timey we're getting at here. But it's kind of that weird old-timey where, like, they were full-on heading straight for the future. Mm-hmm. Like, they were blazing trails in certain aspects. And so it's easy to forget that, like, there are full-on whole halves of nations that are, like, overlooked. They're, like, this class system is pretty out of control at this point in not just Europe, but also America. Mm-hmm. Which we kind of see a little bit in the movie. It's part of the main storyline in the movie. This is part of the part where even James Cameron has said that he took a lot of liberties here.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, back at this time, the British royal family was still German. Yes. They hadn't transitioned to the House of Windsor yet. And, for us architecture nerds out there, tallest building at the time was the Metropolitan Life Tower at 700 feet.
Hey, brownie points if you didn't have to look up what that building looks like.
Yes. I mean, it's... By today's standards, it's tiny.
Oh, it's so tiny.
And same with the Titanic. I looked up a picture because I was talking with my buddy Micah because he loves boats. And I was talking about like how tall the Titanic was. And he's like, oh, that's nothing.
It's puny compared to even our standard cruise ships nowadays.
Oh, yeah.
But for the time period.
Well, that's the thing is he mentioned of like the smallest cruise liner he went on was way taller than the Titanic.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting to look at context of this stuff, just because like I said, Titanic feels like it's such a modern event. And maybe it's due to James Cameron's movie coming out in 1997. But
I do think that James Cameron unintentionally did make this event feel more modern. And there is a discussion and this is a discussion that has always existed around any disaster-based film, is... when is it glorifying something that was terrible? Because this was, and still is, one of the most terrible maritime tragedies ever.
I'll get into that a little bit as well, but...
Yeah. So yeah, I do think, though, that this film is very responsible for people remembering Titanic as much as it is.
Yeah. It's just interesting to me. But also at the same time, I started looking up a little bit of like the history of the Titanic.
Yes.
Not history of the Titanic, but history of Titanic movies in general. Because at its core, Titanic is a disaster movie.
It is. It's also not the first Titanic movie.
No, it's not. And I figured there had been like one or two before.
Nope.
I was surprised. There have been 11 theatrically released movies before James Cameron's Titanic.
And some of those are not like, oh, we're sneaking in kind of movies. Like, some of them were full-on, well-received, at the time, critically acclaimed movies. Yeah, no, exactly. And, I mean, I don't want to go into all of them. I just want to go into some of the bigger ones because... some of them were clearly inspiration for him. Yeah, there's quite a lot to it. So one thing... the very first Titanic movie, Chris. Yep. Guess when it came out? Oh, I kind of remember, like, in history class when we had to do... because I went to a weird school, and one of our research projects was naval time disasters, and one of the kids picked the Titanic, so that everyone else had to pick something else, which was very difficult, because we only knew about the Titanic. And so I do remember them mentioning, like, that almost immediately after the disaster, people were writing books and probably making movies about it. So, I don't know, like a year? 29 days after the sinking. That's too soon! Called Saved from the Titanic. Saved from the Titanic. They went with a hopeful title. Well, it is now a lost film, and it is co-written and starring survivor Dorothy Gibson. Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. And I'm okay with it being lost, though. Yeah, I mean... like, it would be interesting to see Dorothy's portrayal, and especially see how, was present for the actual event. However, putting salt in a fresh wound there. Well, yeah, and I mean, I have a fascination with lost films, just because they're things we're never going to see, as far as we know. Yeah, nowadays. There's a high probability. For me, it's just that lost knowledge that I find fascinating. And the other thing that's kind of weird to try and, like, imagine is, I think everyone is so accustomed to thinking about the Titanic in kind of only James Cameron's movie version, is they made that film freaky fast, which means that there wasn't time for, like, a full boat recreation or flood scene. Yeah. So I would be interested to know, like, how it was written, how it was shown. Was it kind of like a news documentary style film? Was like that would be interesting. So from what I was reading, most of them are
fictional depictions.
Sure, I mean...
Or, of course, with realism put in between because we have so much information on it.
Yeah.
But I thought it was interesting because of the three... There were 3 movies released the same year Titanic sank about the Titanic.
We're jumping on that bandwagon.
The second one was La Hatise, which was and I probably butchered that because it's French. It's a short silent film focused on the fraud of palm reading and criticism of superstition. Which the Titanic is... So, I have seen these 2 movies I'm going to talk about. They both are on YouTube.
My favorite kind of movie.
I mean...
But if they're old enough, like...
They're 1912 silent films. That's the thing. Yeah. We are in the silent era of films when movies about the Titanic are coming out.
We've reached fair game at this point, I think.
And the Titanic is just kind of a pinprick of what's happening in it. It's not really a focus of it.
Okay. Yeah, alright. Sure.
Yeah.
Trying to ground what time period they're in. Titanic's a good point for them, I guess.
Yeah. And the third one is a Deutsch film. In Nacht und Eis.
This one I am a little more familiar with.
They originally had thought it was a lost film until 1998 when a collector realized, hey, I think I have a print of that still in my collection.
See, don't you gotta love addict people who are like, I think I have that.
Yeah. No, and that's a great thing about some of these lost films is we're coming across them decades later because someone stumbles upon them in like a private collection that's now up for auction or something.
Sure.
And though despite a 1901 movie, which, man, that feels weird to say.
Yes.
Movie called Fire, considered to be one of the first, if not the first, disaster movies.
Yeah.
In Nacht und Eis is considered one of the origins of disaster movie genres.
And,
so
that makes sense.
Yeah, all those movies have their roots from Titanic, which I wish I'd done a little bit more digging on this because I'm kind of curious about like how much things have been publicized worldwide. Like at what point did news become world news?
Well, that would be different, especially because of Titanic, though. Because Titanic was an international problem.
Yeah.
And it was in the middle of the ocean.
Yep.
And on top of that, it was carrying international people. There was a little bit of everybody on board if you were, white and heading from Europe to America for the most part.
Yeah.
So yeah, at least for the Western world, Titanic was, at the time, it was a turning point, really.
Yeah, no, again, like we said, it brought about modern safety codes for ocean liners.
Yeah, and also, I don't know, to kind of put into modern perspective, it'd be the equivalent of us putting time pins in things that have happened in, like, American history. Like, everyone can remember where they were on, example, 9/11.
Yeah.
I'm sure for people back in the time, people probably remember what they were doing for Titanic, because at that point, ships were also connected, though. You didn't have to wait for the ship to come back to land to find out the Titanic had sunk a week later.
Yeah.
They knew the next day. But
this is also the same time frame where if the ship goes down, people are assuming that you're going to die with the ship for the most part.
For sure. But it would also mean that, the next day the newsboy would have a paper saying the Titanic sunk. Yeah. Which would have been huge.
Yep. And then the next notable Titanic film that I think was notable is the 1929 Atlantic. Yes. And it is worth mentioning because it was the first sound film about the disaster. It was produced in English, German, and French, as well as a silent version. It's also a German film.
Of course.
As you know, I've been doing a little bit of a dive into German films and Weimar cinema lately.
For old-timey movies, you can't go wrong.
It is also the film of my people's and my grandmother's era, or my Oma's era. So it's just a weird little thing that I have going for it right now. But the German film, or the German version, was also the first full-length German sound film. And it was fairly popular in Germany. And it was filmed on the RMS Majestic, but they were not given the permission to use the Titanic name.
Yeah.
That credit is given to the 1943 fictionalized Nazi propaganda film overseen by Joseph Goebbels himself.
It's definitely Goebbels, though.
Goebbels? Whatever his name is.
It's Goebbels now.
Yes, Goebbels.
The hamster man.
This one I actually found a little bit more interesting than any of the ones before because I started doing a little bit of digging of some of the events around it. It was filmed on the SS Cap Arcona, which was sunk in World War II 1 day before the unconditional surrender of Germany.
Oh, bad timing.
The ship was carrying 5,000 former concentrate camp inmates, of which only 350 survived, along with 16 sailors, 400 SS men, and 20 SS women. It was the largest civilian loss of life of a wartime sinking, and it far exceeded the Titanic. And for some, this is why I like going into some of this stuff because like it's good to put some of the like the events of the Titanic into perspective because it's kind of been romanticized.
Oh no, it definitely
stuff like this gets overlooked.
Yeah,
but and also to give perspective to our time frame, 2,763 people were killed in the collapse of the Trade Center, which we can arguably say that the attacks of 9/11 on the World Trade Center is our modern day Titanic event.
It definitely shook the world in a similar way that Titanic shook the world back then.
Yes. And also, to give a little bit of the plot of the first Titanic movie, it was about the Titanic sinking, and it was a criticism of the British greed, basically. Basically, the plot of it is the owner of White Star is trying to make the Titanic get there faster, so that way he can corner the stock market, and the only one who opposes them is the only German deckhand or something.
I'm sure there was more than one German deckhand, but...
Actually, no, most of the crew, all the crew was British.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. But... I don't know. It's interesting because
it's an interesting take.
Yeah, and it's actually not a terrible movie.
I mean, honestly, some of the plots sound familiar.
Well, it was also
overblown, but
actually, it was never released in Germany during the wartime because they were afraid it was going to cause mass panic because the disaster.
It is a lot, and it would have been more of a recent. Like it's not very recent, but it would have been people would have known. Family members or elder people who would have remembered the time. Nowadays, it's like, you're doing good if anybody remembers.
It's a fun little side note.
Yeah.
And then we get to 1958's A Night to Remember, which up until James Cameron, this was the best and the most accurate of the Titanic movies.
And honestly, if you like the story of the Titanic, but you're not in it for Jack and Rose and some boobs, watch this one. It's actually a very good film.
Yeah, no, it
condenses everything down beautifully.
It is very documentary-esque, or no, not documentary, reenactment-esque.
It's very reenactment-esque. I will say, little bit dry, but yes. I have watched drier.
Yes, I will say of the ones I watched leading up to this, that movie or A Night to Remember and Nacht und Eis are very similar in feel to the documentary style.
Yeah.
Or dramatization, because...
It very much reminds me of some of the more high-budgeted documentaries that we see on TV nowadays.
Yeah.
It's got the similar feel where you can tell they're trying to be entertaining, but also give you some facts.
Exactly. And while I was watching it, because this is probably one of the few Criterion movies I've purchased outside of the sale because I felt I needed to watch it for this episode specifically. There's a lot of similarities in hitting the iceberg and onward that is very similar shot to Cameron's or very similar setups.
Which
again
makes sense though, because a lot of those shots he based off of either survivor stories or previous paintings and drawings.
Salvagings.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess if they did any research at all, there should be some similarities.
Yeah. And a key difference between A Night to Remember and Titanic is in A Night to Remember, and this is before the wreckage discovery of 1985, the ship slowly sinking into the ocean instead of splitting apart.
Yeah,
because
they didn't know.
Yeah, exactly. Because they really didn't know, because there was conflicting reports of the ship splitting and honestly, the ship sinking majestically into, which is a more romanticized idea of like, oh, the ship sunk in one whole piece.
Well, and especially since if you're thinking of the Titanic as the unsinkable ship that happened to hit an iceberg and it went down, it would make more sense as someone who's not an engineer and doesn't deeply understand the science of metal and materials to assume that it goes down like a toy boat in your bathtub does.
Yeah. Other little side note about the movie, because that movie itself is one we could do an entire episode on as well.
Sure.
Some of the effects they used in it were borrowed from 1943's Titanic, which subsequently reflected in James Cameron's Titanic.
You know, they're all tied together because they happen to be about the same disaster.
Yep. And then in 1992, an IMAX documentary called Titanica was released.
Yes.
Then in 1997, James Cameron released what is still probably considered the best love story ever made.
Oh, no doubt it is.
Titanic.
And the world got to see this movie, despite being by far a romantic movie. It is heavy on the romantic side, arguably a little bit more light on the disaster side. It's still a lot of disaster, though.
I will argue against that.
It's a pretty 50-50 split.
Exactly. Because there is a huge shift in the tone of the movie, like between the two parts of, or between the two halves of it. Let's call it that. And
if you remember watching this on VHS tape, you will remember it being in halves because you had to flip the film.
Exactly, which is still weird to think of because the DVD version I have of it is like the 10th anniversary or something.
It's fancy cover.
And it has a DVD version of it, and the DVD is split into two. Unfortunately, I didn't look into like where the movie actually splits.
My mom wouldn't let me touch the VHS collection she had, so.
And I have the VHS one, but I don't have a VHS player right now anymore.
Fair. And also, like, who wants to put their VHS player through that much pain? Like, it's a lot to just fast forward to see where the
split happens,
where the intermission is. But
yes.
But because this film is it is a romance movie, but it is a well-balanced romance movie. It's not a mushy romance movie, arguably. It's a very well-written, well-rounded movie.
Yeah.
Which means that even if you were drugged to see the romance movie, you could probably find something else in the movie to enjoy if you weren't a romance fan.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of good boat stuff in this movie. Which sounds silly, but, like, we know a lot of people who are actually into boats. And if you're into history and history enactment, there's a lot of details in this movie that... There are certain parts of this movie where the details and historical recreations are spot on. And then there are other parts that there are room for arguments on. Which is kind of fun with historical reenactment. Because
especially something this old, too. Because we have enough information, but we don't have everything anymore.
And there are parts that James Cameron himself admits that detail-wise he knows is probably wrong. Example, a couple of scenes with hats here or there. A couple of costume choices here or there. But he did it for a reason. And I will give him pass because of the reasons.
I don't know much about the costume, but from what I've heard, the costumes were spot on. It was more architecture of the Titanic that was off because they only had drawings and the sister ship. So before getting into the movie, now that we've covered a rough history about the history of Titanic movies in general, I kind of want to get into a little bit about how this movie even came to be.
Yeah, because if you haven't heard, this movie happens to be one of the most expensive movies ever created.
Yes, which caused a lot of hoopla about this movie was going to sink like the Titanic.
Fair. Fair guess.
Yeah, because it felt like, from what I was reading and listening to, it sounded like this movie was in not really a production hell, but just kind of, it was getting there.
And to put in perspective, this movie was...
It took like 2 years to film or something?
It took quite a long time by movie standards to film. Mm-hmm. It came out in 1997. The movies that now currently hold the title for most expensive film are the Pirates of the Caribbean series, a couple of movies from there, and the Avengers series.
Series is what we're talking about. Titanic
by itself lasted as the most expensive movie of all time for a really long time.
And we'll get into that in the next episode.
Yeah.
Because I want to talk about the legacy of Titanic after we talk about the film.
Oh, for sure. But to put in perspective, like, how they were able to create this film, you have to understand that, like, there was a shit ton of money thrown at this movie.
Oh, yeah. And here's the best thing. I'll get to that, or I'll get to the best thing in just a minute, because I love this story. Mm-hmm. Cameron was originally not interested in Titanic itself. Mm-hmm. He was more interested in the tech involved in discovery of it in 1985. And this shows, because he's gone on to multiple...
he's like
expeditions,
12 dives down there,
something like that.
It's a
lot. And on top of that, going down to the Marianas Trench.
He's a huge ocean nerd.
And to be fair, before this, he did stuff like I want to say Transformers, but it's not Transformers.
It's not Transformers.
Terminator. He was known as a sci-fi writer.
Yeah.
He's a big fucking nerd, like we've said. All respect. All respect.
Because his nerdism makes this movie what it is. Mm-hmm. But he admits that when he started off with Titanic, he was more interested in the wreck of the Titanic itself than the idea of making, like, a romance movie about the Titanic.
Exactly. And he even began expeditions on the Titanic before the movie was greenlit.
Oh, yeah. He was already down there filming it.
But...
for shits and giggles.
Part of his biggest inspiration was actually A Night to Remember. He watched it, and then he thought of, well, now that we've rediscovered it, there could be a story here, now that we can actually go and see what happened to this thing. Mm-hmm. And I love this story. And he seems extremely proud of it. And hell,
yes, he does.
I would be proud of it. He went into the pitch meeting, not a single word of screenplay written.
Nope.
But went to the executives of Fox with the book Titanic: An Illustrated History by Don Lynch and Ken Marshall, which
is beautiful, by the way.
It is. It's what I know the Titanic of too. Like,
yeah, no,
that beautiful spread of the Titanic sinking.
It is still iconic.
He went into the office, opened up to that spread, mm-hmm. slammed it down on the desk. Romeo and Juliet on that ship.
Which, honestly, it's a pretty damn good pitch.
Yeah, no.
Pretty damn good pitch.
And they all loved it. They're like, all right, take our money.
Yeah, and he took a lot of their money.
Oh, he did.
But because there's also an aspect to this for when he was getting ready to make this film, mm-hmm. that the other side of James Cameron as a nerd comes out. So not only is he a big oceanography and boat wreck nerd, he is also almost on the verge of architect and engineer level perfectionism. That
on top of he got into the film industry by doing everything. There's stories of him like being on set of the Titanic and someone asked for a clean bottle because like the grand staircase scene there, I guess there was a smudge on one of the on one of the part of the floor. And of course it was supposed to, no one had to have been in there yet. And someone was running to get the stuff, and he just grabs the bottle and does it himself. And
this is the same man who got caught putting the final details on the comb that old Rose sees. He's in there putting those on himself.
He has the same level of detail as Stanley Kubrick.
Yes, which is part of the reason why he was able to spend this budget.
Yes, exactly.
Because he, being that level of perfectionism, He also has a wonderful ability to think of the entirety of the movie before mm-hmm. he really gets going. So he knew he was going to need to sink the ship. He also knew that he wanted wide sweeping angles and scenes of the boat, and it wouldn't just be like a one or two times.
Yeah.
He needed a lot of different perspectives of the boat from a lot of different times and periods and sinkings of the boat, which he could have done with all models. And he did some of it with models. But boy, wouldn't it be better if he built a 1-to-1 scale of the Titanic?
Almost 1-to-1.
He took out a middle section.
Yeah, the height and the width are exact.
Yes.
But it was shrunk down lengthwise.
But in the movie, and if you're a film nerd like us, his commentary of the film is one of the more detailed and interesting commentaries that we've listened to.
Yes.
However, unlike something like Lord of the Rings commentary, which is also a detailed and fun commentary.
Which I have yet to get to yet. I want to, though.
We'll watch it together. But unlike that one, which a lot of us, I think that was where a lot of us movie nerds, that's where we really started loving director commentaries. Because that one had a lot of heart and soul and friendship built into a lot of that talk.
Yeah.
This is a very detailed, precise man explaining his detailed and precise tactics to you in every single shot, which is great if that's what you're looking for.
Which, we'll say this right now, we're not going to get into lot of the historic specifics because...
There's too much.
There is so much.
He didn't even get to cover all of it in his entire rewatching of the movie, and he talks for almost the whole movie.
No, it's...
So, yeah, we're going to kind of gloss over some of it.
Exactly. We're going to focus more on the movie itself as a critical review.
Mm-hmm.
So, when he was getting into making this movie, when he was casting the two leads, DiCaprio, for me... It's an
obvious choice.
Now, it feels like an obvious choice, because looking back at his career, this is the most serious movie he'd done up to this point. Because for me, he was arguably a teenage heartthrob and a child actor.
He was definitely a heartthrob.
Yes.
It's the only reason anyone went and saw Romeo and Juliet, let's be real.
Because what I knew him before Titanic, Romeo and Juliet, which
I mean,
we covered.
We did.
Please check that episode out. Self-plugs. The Quick and the Dead, which I always forget he's in that because that was like one of his earliest quote-unquote adult roles.
And honestly, I don't think a lot of people bothered to watch that movie unless you're really into DiCaprio.
Or us who watch stupid westerns.
Or we watch dumb westerns.
What's Eating Gilbert Grape?
Which I know some people still really love. I don't think it... I mean, looking back on him now...
I think for me, from what I've seen, What's Eating Gilbert Grape is kind of like the start of he's a great actor.
You can see it coming through, but he hasn't hit his stride just yet.
No, because before that, the other movie I know him from his very first actorial debut.
Everybody's favorite.
Critters 3.
You know the best Critters. No, it's not. It's terrible.
Arguably all the Critters are kind of bad, but they're fun.
They are fun.
Yeah.
But at the same time, DiCaprio visually, even in like Critters 3, it is easy to picture DiCaprio, especially young DiCaprio. Rephrase, always young DiCaprio. I'm sorry, you have not aged in the same manner that I think a lot of people foresaw. But he aged well for a normal dude. But he started off in DiCaprio.
He started off as a cute teenage heartthrob.
He did. And so, but he's always possessed the look that a 1912 needed character you'd want.
Yeah.
He's always kind of had that look to him. He's always been able to do the eyes where you're like, he's looking through my soul from across the room. We're having a connection. He's always had that ability, which is why I say he feels like an obvious choice. Granted, that's, hindsight 2020.
Mm-hmm.
But when they brought him on to do some casting and to see how it was all going and everything, there were several people on set who were like, I don't care who else you get for this movie. DiCaprio must be here.
Specifically, and I wanted to get into that in just a minute, Kate Winslet.
Which
she, at the time, was
best
known...
part of this movie.
She was known for period pieces in this movie.
She was called Corseted Kate.
Yes.
Which, I don't know. Corsets in movies are notoriously poorly portrayed, and we're going to leave that part on the table, because one of these days I'm going to have a side episode, and we're going to cover real history corsets versus what the movies have done to them.
Okay.
Because this movie didn't help either.
I'll let you take the lead on that episode. I will watch the corsets.
There are plenty to look at, but the fact that she'd already been in period pieces, I could see that be potentially especially for James Cameron, who's looking for a specific feel.
Yeah.
I could see how both that'd be a positive, but also like I would be a little apprehensive to.
You'd want to find someone who's outside of their normal character, their stereotype.
Yeah, because it's a little bit like you knew what you were going to get into because you knew this was a period piece and you know who's in it.
It's like going into the Butterfly Effect expecting Ashton Kutcher to be a
fair
funny character.
It'd be a little bit like watching a romance movie with The Rock in it.
I'm sure there's one out there.
I know there is.
Unfortunately, I don't know much about Kate Winslet's career. I only know her from Titanic and Eternal Sunrest of the Spotless Mind.
I have seen quite a bit of her earlier works, thanks to my husband, who loves her greatly.
Not surprising there. Very much, her
roles were kind of the only part that he watched.
Yeah.
But fair.
But yeah, she was the one who said because she and DiCaprio did a reading together, and she said, even if you don't pick me, pick DiCaprio. And
then she promptly turned around and, advocated for herself almost on a daily basis, which helped a lot because he was like, if you want it that bad, let's go.
Yeah.
Which, honestly, I know it's a typical role for her, but she does such a great job, and you can clearly see the chemistry between the two actors on stage.
Oh, yeah.
They clearly had a well bond. They clearly got along well together, and you could also, there are times when you're watching a movie and you can tell one actor's doing really great, their lines are, spot on, and the other one's kind of looking like a dead fish. They never had that problem.
And I'll get into that a little bit towards the end of this episode, because there's a part of the movie that James Cameron explained, the editing process of some of this, or just the filming process, and I still have that stupid childish thought in my mind that a movie shot in sequential order.
The lie of movie to you?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
I also have that problem.
Which it was not. So
spoiler alert, most movies.
Almost all movies are never shot like that, unless it is The Chronicles of Narnia.
Because we had to make sure they were aged correctly.
Which was great too. Or Boyhood, which I still have yet to see.
Yeah.
Anywho, now that we've covered a good chunk of everything leading up to the Titanic,
let's go over the arguably boring half of the Titanic movie.
Maybe boring for you. I am a softie at heart. Mm-hmm. We have yet to watch a movie that will make me cry yet. One, because I don't wish to be vulnerable.
Mostly because we keep picking action and kung fu movies.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of tears in kung fu.
/ movies we've actually sat down and watched together, because
fair.
We've gotten busier over the past year or so.
True. Very true.
Yeah. So, into 1997's Titanic.
Yes.
So, I love how this movie opens, honestly. Ooh. That was gross.
No more champagne for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm doing fine. So, I thought it was interesting because it is such a simple and nice opening of resplicing of shots from the Titanic leaving over the water, kind of reflecting the ultimate fate that we know is happening. And it sets the tone of the movie from the very get-go. And I love that Cameron had a hard time figuring out how to start the movie.
And to be honest with you, it kind of opens a little bit like those cheesy old documentaries do, where they splice in a bunch of footage to prep you for what you're about to watch. But it works in this sense because we're watching something that we know is historically accurate.
Yeah.
But we're here for the not historical people.
Yeah, and I mean, at the same time, if you're watching this movie never going into it,
yeah,
you know what happened to the Titanic.
Yeah, which is part of the problem of the Titanic, is how do you get people to forget what happens to the Titanic?
Yes. And how it starts off is once we've dissolved into the water, it's in a shot of 2 submersibles.
Looking at the Titanic at the bottom of the ocean.
Diving into it.
Which, the footage for this is a kind of a fun take on it, because if you aren't a science nerd, you probably haven't watched the documentaries of the Titanic, because they're dry. They're funner than some documentaries, but I wouldn't say go out of your way to watch them.
I feel for today's audience, the documentaries would be dry because we grew up with the History Channel and Animal Planet being...
The History Channel?
Yeah, exactly.
And not Alien Channel? Yes. So I like the intro where we're in modern times, we get to see the end of the Titanic, and we get to see it in somewhat of a realistic way. It's portrayed very realistically. Not every shot is real, but you don't care.
Which I thought was really cool, honestly, because the shots of the submersibles are done between two different takes.
Yeah.
The general rule is if you see two submersibles, it's a studio shot of the Titanic upside down, whole model upside down, in a smoke-filled room.
Which it looks really cool, and
they splice together so well that even
you can't tell.
Oh yeah,
unless you know what you're looking for, it looks spot on.
Oh yeah, the cast members were saying that they're pretty sure they tricked Cameron on a couple of the shots.
Nice.
But generally, submersibles are launched 30 minutes apart with no lights on.
Nerd. That's, by the way, a direct quote from James Cameron himself. That's the level of detail you're getting if you watch his commentary.
That was actually commentary from the two historians.
They who are also nerds.
I think they also do the commentary for A Night to Remember that I didn't get to. But on top of that, most of the footage we actually see from the submersibles, it was done in the first expedition.
Yeah. And all of the shots where we see the Titanic, while they do kind of help bring a mystery and kind of an eerie sense of calm and peace, they're also just kind of setting us up to be thrown back up above surface where we get to meet our narration crew cast.
Modern day, because this movie, I will say,
it's got to do a plot.
Yeah,
a loose one, but it's there.
Well, and
we don't care about the modern day plot. Let's be real here.
Yeah, and there's a bit more to that I'll go into a little bit later on. I actually really like. I'm not gonna lie, I like the opening of this movie.
I do too.
They also talk about, like, Cameron talks about how he took some license for the initial interior shots, but then compared it to further dives.
Yeah, they look pretty good. And
he said he was pretty accurate on most of them.
Yeah.
But I also like how early on they set up Brock, the
one you're immediately gonna forget his name.
The treasure hunter.
Yep. The one with the pirate earring.
He's kind of a dickhead.
He is. He's not kind of. He is a total dick.
He has a lack of respect for the history and the people who died in the event.
And honestly, I think it's easy for you to make the connection between him and, like, a general audience not knowing much about the Titanic. Because it was so long ago, it's easy to forget this was a real tragedy that really affected a lot of people. And so he kind of fills that role for the audience.
Yeah. And I like how he finds some safe.
He finds a safe. They've decided that's the safe.
It's a safe.
It's a safe.
Because he has an expectation. There's only so many large-scale estate rooms for what he's looking for.
Yes.
Because he opens it up, bunch of nasty water pours out.
Yep. Finds some old-timey money, which you can tell he's looking for something valuable, because old-timey paper money, that's worth a lot.
It is.
And he does not care. That's not what he's looking for. And instead, he finds some old-timey nudes.
Oh, yeah. Back when you had to draw your nudes if you wanted them.
Can you imagine teenagers drawing nudes to send to each other? God. 1910 times were weird.
Look at all classical art in general. They carved marble, stone.
This is true. I mean, this is entirely exactly what happened. But,
yeah.
but almost
all our classical statues are nude people.
And they were probably sculpted off of real people.
Yeah.
With some liberties taken. I hope.
Maybe. But yeah, so he discovers the picture of Rose.
Mm-hmm. Who awkwardly is coming to visit.
Well, I actually want to get into a couple things before that. I like his interaction of finding the drawing, because he finds an unintentional clue.
Yes.
Which, again, starts building up a little bit of the mystery because, one, he hasn't found the heart of the sea, which is what the diamond's called, but he finds a drawing of a woman wearing it.
Didn't even notice the boobies. Just looked at the necklace.
Yes.
That's how you know this man's focused.
Fun fact, James Cameron actually did all the drawings for this movie.
Because, on top of being a giant fucking nerd, he's also incredibly talented.
Yes.
In everything he does.
Also, he mentioned that paper artifacts preserved in leather have been found on the Titanic. So
and it was inside a safe. So, yeah, sure.
Well, it's surrounded in water and sediment, but he also got people saying, oh, that would never happen. He's like, no, we found stuff like this.
Yeah, no.
Other little side interest, a blue diamond is mentioned in 1943's Titanic. Yes.
Probably not the giant honking diamond the movie shows.
Yeah, the jewels are pretty big in that movie too.
Pretty giant diamond.
Yeah.
But yeah, and there were actual valuable treasures that were truly lost on the Titanic. Mm-hmm. There is famously a painting that was lost to the Titanic that we will never get back. I don't remember who painted it, but somebody famous did.
I have no clue either.
Not me.
And so at this point, he's like, oh shit, I think we found something. And so they send a news broadcast out to the world. Hey, we have found something on the Titanic. Mm-hmm. And this is when Rose is introduced, played by Gloria Stewart,
who is by far my favorite actress in this movie.
She was in her 80s and was a little bit annoyed that they had to age her up to 101, which the makeup is so well done.
They did a great job.
I was looking up a little bit of her history. She was Hollywood royalty.
Yeah, she was.
Sadly, the only movie I know her from, well, maybe not sadly, was she played Flora Cranley in 1933's The Invisible Man.
Yes.
Which I think you still have my copy of.
I most certainly do. No, one of these days we'll get into some of the old Hollywood royalty, because there are a lot of movies she was in that I do think you would like.
Okay.
But, it's one of those genres where you're either into it or you're forced into it.
Yeah.
You don't stumble across it.
Yeah.
Not anymore, anyway.
And so, her and her granddaughter, we can assume at this point.
Yes.
Are just chilling. She's doing pottery, and she hears the news and sees her nudies.
Which, she handles it like a champ. Because she goes, hey, that nude person, that's mine.
Yeah. Well, so here's what I like about this part is, and this is a nice cutting too that Cameron mentions, is that generally when you're cutting movies and filming movies, you make that, when it switches between scenes, if you keep it daytime, no one's going to notice.
Yeah,
but he switches between daytime and nighttime between the calls.
Yeah, because they were not on the same side of the world.
Yeah.
There would be time gap, which is a nice detail.
Yeah, it's super nice. That's what I love about that too, especially being someone who lived overseas trying to call people stateside.
You spend a lot of time going, are you done with dinner yet? Because I need to go to bed.
Yeah. And what I like about this part too is she reveals to him information that they don't have privy to them. Because first off, Brock doesn't want to talk to her. He thinks, oh, she's just some senile old woman. And
which rude.
Yeah, and the thing that I love is it kind of reminds me of like true crime with serial killers, or just true crime in general, where the police will release enough information but not everything. So when the person boasts about it, it's like, oh, it's you.
I didn't tell you they were stabbed with a knife.
Exactly, because she specifically calls it the heart of the sea, and that's what piques his interest.
Yes.
Like DiCaprio in Django Unchained.
Yes.
But
anyway.
But yeah, so back to this. They're on the boat, and one of my favorite characters in the movie, because, one, he's a big nerd like us.
He is also a big nerd.
Louis Bodine, which you never ever hear his name. The guy in the smiley face t-shirt.
Which, by the way, now that you've watched Titanic recently, does he not remind you of that one guy from The Meg?
Yeah.
Do you think that was a subtle reference?
I don't know now.
Because they're both undersea, deep sea explorers who run subnautical diving things. And they both have a similar style, sense of humor, hair. overall shape.
Maybe.
Might have been a subtle plug.
Maybe.
Maybe.
We'll see. Actually, I have no clue.
We have no way to confirm that.
Exactly. What I like about this little part, because Cameron goes into a little bit about it, is that Bodine is actually based off a man named Louis Abernathy, who is a writer, director himself. But when they couldn't find an actor for him,
they were just like, hey, you get to do it.
Yeah, basically. And this guy's not an actor.
Honestly, he does fine. You have no idea.
He's
you don't
great.
Notice.
And at this point is where Cameron gets into his nerdiness as well. This is
where we start rolling with the historical bit.
Yes. So Rose gets brought aboard. She brings her pictures with her. Which...
In her defense... When you get to be that old, you get to do whatever the fuck you want. And if you want to bring every hatbox you own onto a tiny ship in a helicopter, you can do that.
Well, and something I didn't realize as well, because honestly I haven't been around a lot of elderly people.
Fair. Especially nowadays.
Nowadays as well. But Cameron mentioned that that's actually pretty common, is people will bring pictures with them to give them some sense of comfort or familiarity.
And to be honest with you, Titanic is a good example, especially if you're into this history stuff. We don't travel like we used to. We travel exceptionally light compared to how people used to travel. It was not uncommon for you to bring everything in the kitchen sink, because what if you needed it? Everybody changed 5 times a day. You don't have your phone to flip through and entertain yourself. You've got to bring that shit with you.
Yeah.
And also, like, if your journey's going to take you half a year to get across the ocean, you might as well bring a good book.
Yeah, exactly. And so Rose is on the boat. She's being Rose.
She's being Rose. She's what I strive to be as an old person.
Doesn't give a shit.
Doesn't give two
Goes
shits.
at her own pace and forces people to go with her.
Yep. And she knows it. I love her.
Other little side note, the granddaughter is Cameron's wife.
She made an appearance. And on top of that...
They met on the set.
They did, and on top of that, the 2 actresses in the scene became actually really good friends, and they hung around all the way up until her passing. Yeah,
sad.
But she made it to be about the same age as fictional Rose would have been, about 100.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Cameron was wondering if a woman of that age would have that cognitive ability that Rose does.
Hell yes.
Well, he actually went and interviewed a woman who was an artist, which I think became part of Rose's character of being a potter. And he said she was one of the quickest witted women he had ever met. So at this point, I actually really like how there's kind of, again, another contrast between Rose remembering the event and the expedition crew. Part. Because Lewis goes into this nerdy rant of how the Titanic sank.
And for him, it's not an event that has any emotion attached to it. It's an interesting thing that happened.
Yeah, exactly. It's like us reviewing a movie compared to someone being in the movie.
Exactly.
But I like how, one, Cameron still stands by the 3D model of it as of 2005.
I mean, yeah, it's a good model.
Yeah.
It's a nice way to describe things.
It's good 2000s digital effects.
Yes.
Or computer design.
Yeah.
But I like how, even though he's super involved in the science of the event, Rose is still grandma polite.
She is very grandma polite.
That was a very scientific explanation.
Yes.
Because she also puts him in his place that he has no emotion to it.
Yeah.
He has the wrong emotion to it. But yeah, I think it's interesting for me.
It is. And then we shift into Rose narrating what actually happened.
It's been 84 years.
Yeah.
That great meme.
So good. And we get to see young Rose, and to be honest with you, the beginning part of her and Jack getting on the Titanic, I don't really care. I like the introduction to the characters because it does give them some backstory. I'll give you that. However, in the grand scheme of Titanic the movie, I give no shits about this part.
And I am on the opposite side, and I'll explain that in a minute. Personally, I do like this portion. One, because of Cameron being his nerdy self.
Yeah, for sure.
This is really the first part we've had the mixture of practical and digital effects.
Yes, and at the time, I will give you, I'm sure they looked phenomenal. They still look really good. They have aged. Not a lot.
Yes.
Not as much as some, but they're getting there.
This scene in particular still holds up, I think.
Oh yeah, no.
But what I like about this is it quickly establishes the haves and the have-nots of just how they're getting on the ship. First off, big nerds for this as well, because they spent time going through old-fashioned magazines.
True.
Nothing in the scene, car-wise, clothing-wise, post-date spring 1912.
No, this scene in particular, I think, is spot on. Mm-hmm. This is not where I have my quirks with the costuming.
Okay. So what I like about the scene is the sequence of events, is how Rose gets on the ship compared to Jack. Mm-hmm. For Rose, this establishes the sub-narrative or the subplot of the class system within the movie.
Sure. Because
Rose getting on the boat is, it's a humdrum affair. She's not even impressed by the Titanic. Compared to DiCaprio and Fabrizio.
His poor, sad friend that we don't get to see a whole lot.
Yeah, but he's there.
He's there. He's on the boat, I swear.
They're super excited because this is their ticket to the United States again.
Yes.
And I just like the contrast that this immediately establishes.
Sure. I can see where you're going.
So, and on top of that, what I like about this is, they get also them just hopping on the boat, then them being asked if they have lice, because that was a real thing. They didn't check any first-class passengers. They checked the third-class passengers if they had lice.
You dirty hermits.
And DiCaprio's like, we don't have lice. We're Americans.
I hate to break it to you British people, but Americans definitely have lice, too.
Yeah. But also at this time, this is where I like in the commentary of Cameron pointing out his inaccuracies.
Sure.
Because he even says that there were no bars that close to the Titanic, but he took artistic license to advance the plot. They were more like 3 or 4 blocks away.
Yes, and honestly, that part historically I don't care about. It doesn't break scene. No. It doesn't bring you out of the moment whatsoever.
But because it's there, it adds a nice flow to the movie of now he has
a ticket.
It makes me think of the ending scenes in romance movies where it's will he meet her, will he not?
Oh, the last minute airport?
Yeah. It's the last minute of will he get on the Titanic or not?
True. Yeah.
And also while all this is happening, I like this part because Rose is getting on the Titanic, and the sailing of the Titanic was supposed to take 7 days. Mm-hmm. And they're all putting up their paintings of put that there, put that there.
Like I said, back the oldie timies, we traveled different.
Yeah.
Even the lower class people bring stuff that nowadays we would be like, oh, why bother?
Well, and on top of that, when I was re-looking at my notes, it made me think of her entering the research vessel itself. Mm. She's brought her pictures with her.
Yes.
Instead of them being oil paintings.
She's brought photos.
She's brought photos.
Yeah.
And for me, this is where parts of the scene, or parts of the filming of the Titanic get a little, rough.
Yeah.
The engine room scene.
There are certain shots in the engine room scene that I still think hold really well.
Yes.
And then they quickly transition into other scenes of the engine room that I think, especially now with how nice home TVs have gotten, mm-hmm. it doesn't quite flow the same, I think.
Exactly. And also how far special effects. To be fair, though...
Oh, this movie created some of these special effects.
Yes, these were some of these first shots we saw like this. Not this part in particular, but the engine room itself was shot on... at a scale 1/3 the scale. Or,
they found a real engine in a real ship, but it's smaller than the Titanic's.
Yes. Because at the time, the Titanic had the largest reciprocating engines at the time, which I'm sure boat nerds will know what the hell that means, or engineering nerds will know what that means.
It does engine things.
Yeah, but for me, there's just parts of this scene that become a little bit weird for me.
This, and once we move back out of the ship and we start seeing it from a distance.
The big money shot.
I can see where it was impressive and at what time it was impressive. Yeah, it just doesn't look the same, does it? There are parts that, especially now that we've reached, and part of this is because of this movie, granted, but there are definitely scenes that the bigger overarching scenes of the ship out at sea read a little static.
Yeah, they're a little off, or some of the...
You get a little bit of Uncanny Valley with them. Not with like weird teeth and bear thing, but just in like a, I know it's not real.
Yeah, it makes me think of, especially some of the extra character models. They're very rigid. It makes me think of early...
They all have great posture.
Yes, it makes me think of early CGI films like Final Fantasy, The Spirit Within.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like, they're not the worst thing ever, but once you see them, you can't unsee them.
No, exactly. And especially with us who... graphics have advanced so far.
And arguably we watch a lot of movies with special effects and CGI people in it. And so we're privy to see really, really good examples and also examples that have aged really well.
Yes.
And while I see what he did, and it is because of him that we use this technique nowadays on pretty much everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody looks like they're walking with a stick up their butt.
Yeah, because Titanic invented a lot of these techniques.
Like they had no idea how to do this when they started.
Like the wake of the Titanic is generally an actual ship, and then some of the back stuff is fluid physics, and then the Titanic superimposed on all of that.
Yeah, there's a lot of slicing stuff together to make this movie, which looks great, and if you didn't know that, you would have no idea. But once you see it,
Guess how much that scene itself cost to shoot. To create.
Knowing the budget of this gigantic ass movie, I'm gonna say something unreasonable like $1 million.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Estimated $1 million.
Granted, I'm sure some of that money was like, we built the model for this, and they use it later on, but like, still, that's a lot of money.
Well, and I also like this. I like this sequencing too because it still continues to establish and further the subplot of the class system. Of this era, because we have the dirty, sweaty engine room workers contrasted with the posh Rose party. And DiCaprio's character, who's so excited to be
on a boat,
king of the world.
He's so excited to be on a boat.
Exactly. But yeah, I don't know. It's just an interesting I think contrast.
I think the movie does a good job of trying to portray that contrast to its audience, because a lot of the class structure was something that you didn't... Granted, you can see it, but it was a lot of unspoken rules and a lot of unspoken etiquette that everyone just... That's how life was. And so how do you visually show that without spending way too much time on building up characters and backgrounds that you don't need for this already very long movie? Exactly.
And we also start to see that frustration within the class with Rose herself.
Yes.
Because she's hanging out with all the posh people.
Which my husband and I have a theory.
Okay.
And we couldn't find anywhere that it specifically said this is what happened. But so Rose is hanging out with her mom, who you're meant to hate because she's supposed to be part of the problem with stifling. And, you know, she wants Rose to get married to this handsome man. The handsome man is also supposed to be part of the problem. And I do kind of wish there was a way for the audience to see handsome fiancé man as more of the standard gentleman as opposed to like the villain.
Yeah.
But like that would have made the movie way, way, way too long, and it's already way too long. You see what I say?
Yeah. No.
Because his ideals and how he holds himself would have been a norm of the time.
Yeah.
He would have been a very normal dude.
And I think that's maybe part of the issue as this movie or as the era ages, is...
We're getting so far away from that thought process and that time period.
That it's alien to us. Kind of like when we watch movies set in Edo.
Yes.
Where it's like, oh, they would do, or that
people
stuff
would just
happened.
go along with that? Like, yeah, because that's what it was.
Because that's how society was structured.
Yeah, and so...
again, harkening back to what we've talked about, how old this era is, Titanic takes place in the Edwardian era.
Yeah.
Women in England could not fully get the right to vote till 1928. In the U.S., not until 1920.
Women didn't wear pants, damn it.
Yeah.
Like...
Unless you were horseback riding.
And even then, there were skirts that would have been better.
And there were specific ways to ride the horse.
There's a whole whole rigmarole. So, like, I appreciate that James Cameron assumed that you were into period enough to know these rules, but I kind of wish that maybe Fiancé Man was portrayed as less of a dick.
You know, I'm okay with him being portrayed.
I'm okay with his portrayal, mostly because, like, otherwise this movie would have been forever and a day long.
Yeah.
And I don't see a way around it. I do appreciate that they bothered to, and this would have been somewhat historically accurate, they bothered to let it look like he wore makeup.
Yeah.
Because he probably did. Rich men wore makeup.
Rich men still wear makeup.
Yeah, and so I appreciate that my husband looked up from this movie and goes, is that man wearing mascara? I went, probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
But no, I just think it's interesting because we quickly established, one, also that Rose is a highly intelligent woman.
But she does a good job of pretending to be dumb.
When she has to.
Yes, she has figured out the rules of the game and she's playing them well.
Yeah, or she's been forced to.
Yeah.
Because also still at this time, women are still kind of, or for the most part, seen as property.
Yeah.
And without a husband, you're kind of nothing. Or
you
at the time.
You would have had to been a wealthy widow to have been something.
Yeah, because I was looking up into the right to vote, and some of the right to vote had to deal with, or land ownership. A woman couldn't own land, even like if she was a widower.
Yeah.
It still went to like the next of male heirs.
You had to be like on your own level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But we're also at the rise of the female suffrage movement.
Yeah.
Early feminism.
We're getting there? Question mark?
It's the first steps towards it.
Not in this movie, we're not. But,
no,
you know,
but just the era, just to give some context, because
honestly,
again, how old this movie setting is.
Yeah, because honestly, this scene and then kind of this scene transitioning into her tea time scenes and her chit chats with her mom and her fiance Carl, all of that. All it does is help bring a modern audience into that time period's thought process. And
gives a quick narrative of why she's going to try and commit suicide.
Yes. And then we also get to see we get to see some of what Jack is experiencing a little bit. We get to see that he's a little bit more... He's obviously a very free spirit. But through his context, we get to see that he doesn't get to be part of her world. Yeah,
we're quickly established that he's a dreamer. He's a dreamer as well, because...
They are well suited together.
Yeah, because the next part we see him in, he's looking up at the stars. Mm-hmm. And, of course, that's what artists do.
Which, sure, why not, homie?
Yeah. But that's how they meet,
she is so upset about
Scratch that. Sorry, he has first seen her from below, because he is on the deck below and he's not normally allowed up on the deck with her.
Yes. Which, again, I appreciate that we kind of see Jack struggle with being a lower class and poorer person on the Titanic. It's a little bit brushed over because Jack is meant to be a free, I don't give a shit person. So he's gonna jump the rope and doesn't give two fucks who tells him no. Yeah. So we don't see his rigidity, but it's balanced out with her rigidity.
Yeah.
Her roles and her people around her make the lines very clear in the sand. Mm-hmm. And you just get the sense that Leo's character doesn't care. Yeah. He's gonna do what he wants to the best of his ability.
Exactly. One thing I actually learned that was kind of interesting, her taking off her shoes is actually pretty common for maritime or suicide victims.
That's how you know you went over. Because otherwise you'd just be gone. Disappear ghost.
Yeah, which I didn't know. I mean, I think
it's still a tradition in some parts of the world.
Yeah.
Where if you're going to jump off a bridge, you leave your shoes.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, at least in America, it's not as much a thing. What it's turned into is shoes are now found because our shoes are made of rubber.
Yeah.
So, like, the translation still made it across for modern audiences.
Yeah, like in Washington where all the feet were coming ashore.
Yeah, I hope they fix that problem. It's a lot of feet.
Yeah. But I also like this scene, too, because we're also learning how headstrong Rose is.
Yeah.
Because if she's not going to be able to live the way she wants, she's sure as hell going to go out the way she wants to on her own terms.
Yes.
And also, little inaccuracy that Cameron notes is that the lake that Jack mentions did not exist at the time.
Whoops. It's a man-made lake.
And they did not know that.
Which, honestly, like, the rest of this movie, they get so many details right.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Exactly.
I don't care.
But I also like his approach. Instead of running over to grab her, he's taking the slow approach of talking to her, quickly building up trust. It's almost like the hostage situations you see in movies. You want to build the trust of the...
And honestly, it's a nice way to quickly break the boy sees girl, falls in love, boy gets girl stereotype. Because throughout all of this, he's letting it be Rose's choice.
Yeah. And
well, it's implied that it's all Rose's choice to turn around and come back. He never at any point grabs her until she slips.
Yeah, and which was also an interesting part, too, because I guess beaded dresses were super common at the time. Popular. And so that, of course, causes her to trip. And this is also kind of what makes me curious about romance movies in general, because at this part, I've started to realize how intelligent both characters are.
Mm-hmm.
And I also appreciate the smudge makeup of Rose after she's found.
Yes.
But we also, again, are reestablished DiCaprio's place in society once they hear Rose scream. They
come over, they see a man with no jacket, no shoes, which, oh my god, man took shoes off. How dare he? And immediately the men who come to rescue her assume that shenanigans have happened.
Yeah, they assume that Jack is assaulting her because, of course, a third-class passenger would do that.
Dirty scoundrel rat. Also,
it has a very anime landing.
Yeah, it's a little forced.
It's just shy of crotch in the face.
Yeah, it really is. And, like, I understand its writing and its purpose in the story. It's definitely there to help solidify to the audience this time period, because honestly, even if they hadn't been found in that compromising position, Jack probably still would have been handcuffed first and questions asked later.
Yeah, but I also like this part too because we're also, again, re-understanding Rose's role and how she's working the system.
Yes.
Because initially there's a little awkward moment of him like saying, hey, that's not how that happened. And she's like,
No, that's totally how it happened, remember?
Yeah, she's like, I was leaning over and I fell.
I was trying to look at the spinny things,
the propellers.
She's
playing
pretending,
up being dumb.
Yeah. Which, it does play into Rose's smarts.
Mm-hmm.
Also, just to kind of help you get an understanding to beaded dresses, if you have time and you're interested into historical garb, I highly recommend looking up the peacock dress. Would it have been something that Rose could have afforded? No. However, there are people currently online who are attempting to recreate the peacock dress, and the amount of detail that went into these beaded dresses at the time would make people lose their minds. Granted, this is an extreme example, but the amount of beads on her dress would have been incredibly heavy.
Your knowledge of period fashion is still impressive to me.
I spend a lot of time watching these.
You're also a fucking nerd.
I am a huge old-timey dress nerd.
And so, at this point, Jack is released, and what's the best term? The lackey for pompous guy.
So, and to help kind of explain his role, because they kind of explain it, but this is another piece that James Cameron kind of let you...
Cal is the pompous guy's name.
Yes. So they kind of want you two already know this because, again, this movie's already way too fucking long. So, back in these times, the different levels of manservants that followed you around, you could have, like, a best friend level manservant, and sometimes those manservants, like, even went to war with you. They carried your shit in war.
Sherlock and Holmes.
No. Holmes would have been at the same level as Sherlock, if not higher, since he's a doctor. If Sherlock... No.
It's how they treat each other. It's how Sherlock treats Holmes.
It is how Sherlock treats Holmes, but that's kind of the point. Is like Holmes is treating a
higher ranking, socially
or at
ranking.
least an equal, like he's below him.
Yeah.
And so this man is the equivalent of a manservant. Like, that's kind of the thought process you can have with him. But also think of him as, like, family best friend plus manservant.
Okay.
So this man has probably been in Rose's life her entire existence. She
or
probably,
at least her relationship to Cal.
Exactly. He's definitely been, like, in Cal's relationship, probably Cal's entire life. He's probably always looked after him. And so he would see himself as Cal's protector. Yeah. Because that's part of his job.
And he's protecting his interest, aka Rose, his property.
And also, he'd probably be trying to extend the service to Rose. Like, he's probably trying to pretend like she's part of the family. They're engaged. Back then, that was a pretty done and set thing. People didn't just break engagements for no reason.
Yeah.
So
unless you're a king.
And even then, that's frowned upon.
He created his own religion spin-off.
Yeah, if you're royalty...
You can do whatever you want.
To some extent. Cal doesn't get that privilege. So that's kind of what that person's real life role would have been. And granted, James Cameron doesn't explain him to you because he kind of assumes you're also a bit of a history nerd and you don't need it.
Yeah, we're aware of the role.
Yeah.
And so after this scene, there's a scene between Cal and Rose where she is, air quotes, gifted the heart of the sea.
Just, because don't you love me?
Basically, another way to ensnare her.
Well, and on top of that, this is probably Cal's, like, for the time period, you didn't get married because you loved people. You got married because it was a good deal. And so the fact that he can buy her this fancy-ass diamond and be like, wouldn't this be great to have? I mean, he's not wrong.
Because, like, we look back on, like, true crime stuff, and, like, people got married with knowing someone for days. Or months.
Yeah. And, like, so the fact that this guy is, granted, he's supposed to be the bad guy. You're not supposed to like him. You're supposed to like her and DiCaprio. But
you're also still enamored by the jewel itself.
But also, like, he's trying to prove to her, like, hey, we're not even married yet, and I'm willing to throw down some serious dollars on you.
Yeah, and he's also invited Jack to dinner before this.
As a show of good faith.
As a good faith, not expecting him to actually show up.
Because, to be honest, and, like, some cruise ships still do this, there is a strict dress code at dinner. Jackets are required. And he's probably betting that Jack doesn't have a jacket.
Oh, yeah.
But in comes my favorite character who happens to be a real-life badass.
Molly Brown.
Dear Molly. Well, I love Molly.
Before we get into this a little bit, I do want to mention that Cameron even brought this up. Where they cut him giving the necklace, there is 8 to 10 minutes of extra footage on top of that. Which would have dragged it down quite a bit.
It would have. But also, like, that would be interesting.
Oh, yeah.
But also, like, you already need a potty break halfway through this movie. So,
Yeah. And so before the dinner scene, we actually have the spitting scene.
We do.
Jack
I like
and Rose
the spitting scene.
Re-meeting each other again. A lot of people didn't want this scene to happen. Yes.
And honestly, the spitting scene kind of solidifies how young they are. Because you kind of gloss over it. Because they're both very good looking. She's upper class, which I think for a lot of modern people, upper class equals a little bit more aged. If you can act polite and proper, you're not 17. You see what I mean?
There's a level of maturity.
Exactly.
There's a level of maturity to old high class, not today's rich kids of Instagram bullshit.
Exactly. And so, like, it's easy to forget that these are children. Granted, they're 1 year away from being allowed to, like, live on their own without having to get parents' permission.
They're like our age.
In old-timey times, sure. But, I mean, I remember me as 17. Dumbass child. And so, like, the spitting scene kind of helps bring you back to the concept that, like, they're not 30-year-old adults.
Yeah.
This is...
Well, okay, not just that, but for me, I saw this scene as Rose starting to unshackle herself. Because now, Jack, this free spirit, who as a third-class passenger, of course he's going to be spitting.
If sure. Because, you know, why not?
Yeah, she's a classy lady. She's not going to.
No, yeah.
And in walks the mom and...
dear Cal.
Molly Brown.
And I love Molly Brown.
Played by Kathy Bates.
Yes.
Which, not gonna lie, every time I see Kathy Bates, I forget how great of an actor or actress she is.
She really morphs into her roles really well.
Oh, yeah. And every role I've seen her in, she is drastically different and pulls it off.
Yes.
It's very much like the guy who played Lincoln. I can't think of his name right now.
Yes.
Yeah, you know who I'm talking about.
Not the Vampire Slayer Lincoln.
No, not that. Oh, this is gonna kill me. Daniel Day-Lewis.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
That's who I'm thinking of. But yeah, no, I like how she shows up because her character is a nice addition for an in-between character. She was, I think her husband was an oil tycoon.
I believe
or
so.
Or he struck it rich with gold. She basically was...
She came into money. She was not born into money.
Yeah, she was she was what they called new money.
She was. And historically, I think he nailed Molly's character from what we can tell historically. Granted, there are parts where he took liberties with what happened those days on board with her.
Yeah.
But the character that she plays sounds like that's pretty much how she was.
And I think he had a lot of play with that too. And that's what I like this portion of the movie is because he's doing such a great job of initially weaving in fiction into real events.
Yeah.
To make it feel like this could have happened potentially.
Yeah, like he's not leaving a giant plot hole open to himself.
Yeah. And so she, at this point, she likes Jack.
Yes.
Because I think she sees some of herself in him. That
and also,
he's, at his heart, he's a good boy.
And at the same time, it's implied that she also has a son who's probably about Jack's age.
Because she thinks he has a suit that will fit him.
And so it was probably that she was in England for some fun or business. And if you're going to be in England, you might as well buy your son a new suit. And so she's going to lend it to him. And you kind of get the sense that she kind of sees her own son in Jack.
Yeah. And, again, we see kind of the role of class again, because...
Yeah. I do like that they let Jack be quick enough on his feet to handle this situation, but not so intelligent that he's not a little bit bewildered by what to do. Yeah,
he's street smart. This is probably one of his first major interactions with the wealthy outside of...
just seeing them on the street.
Exactly.
He's forced to dine with them.
Yeah.
And I like how they handle it. He deflects where he knows he can. He leans on Molly when he knows he can. And for the most part, he just charms the heck out of the table. Yeah. Well, before you skipped ahead a little bit. Oh, sure. So back to how their interactions. I like this. We really start to see this tribalism between the well-to-do and the poor. And for me, I think that ties well into what we know is going to happen into the Titanic. Yeah. Just because our survivalist portion of the lizard part of our brain is very much into, like, we're going to protect what's ours. We're going to... And you have some heart for the mom because that's what she's trying to do. We know the mom's trying to protect the daughter from what she perceives as a threat. But Molly Brown is... Yeah. Come here, son. To go into a little bit of detail about the dinner scene. Yes. Big fucking nerds again. This is another historical scene. The plates, silverware, and coasters are all reproduced to the level of accuracy of the White Star line at the time. And the way they're being served, from what I understand, what I've read, that's about right. Yeah. They had real beluga caviar. Fancy. For authenticity. Fancy. To be fair, though, I do want to try some really high-end, because, like, I had... You and I can split it. I think my husband will stand at the other end of the room and go, ugh.
Yeah.
Like a cat.
Well, I'm curious just because I've always thought of some of this stuff as hoity-toity.
I've had caviar. I've never had fancy caviar.
Yeah.
But I've had caviar, and I will say, it is nice.
Well, at my buddy's bachelor party, I had foie gras for the first time, and...
Oh, man.
Oh.
Yeah. There is a reason why rich people pick the foods they do, and it's not because they happen to have them.
Yes.
It's because they taste damn nice.
Yes. So, anywho, side tangent there.
But yes, this is one of the scenes where if you're a history nerd, this is a lovely level of detail.
Yeah, and a level of detail that they had to take a little bit of leniency to was the staircase. They don't have any pictures that still exist of it.
Yeah.
But they modeled it off of drawings and the Olympics.
Yes, and to be fair, it looks how all of the descriptions that you can find from people's entries and journals and things like that, which that's good enough for me.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't have an exact thing to copy, make it match whoever's story I'm reading. So the clock, the two figures coming up on either side of it, the double entry staircase, all of that matches the survivors' accounts of the staircase. Yeah.
No, I don't know. I love this part because they actually did hand carve all that stuff.
But if you're gonna hand carve something, you might as well.
Well, and they also mentioned like the level of detail they went. They couldn't have understood the building itself, like how we have to do scale models. They didn't understand the scale of the space until they actually built it. I think the only one they didn't do was the grand room altogether.
Yeah, because that room was gigantic.
Which Cameron mentioned that they might have spent as much
Modeling
on a digital model.
I think he's just being sad that they didn't full model it.
Oh, you know he is. You know he is.
But in his defense, because they bothered to model this, not only is this one of the most beautiful films of all time, but also it means that things like Titanic museums around the world are very much a thing.
Yeah. But so, anywho, now we get to dinner.
Yes.
Where Jack is there, but he's kind of unwanted. No, he's totally unwanted.
With the exception of, I think he charms his way for some of the male guests who don't know him. I think they find him incredibly youthful, and he does charm them.
Yeah.
The ones who have seen his face before clearly do not want him there.
Yeah. No, and
Molly Brown clearly loves that Jack is at this table, because I think in her mind, this is her having some fun with some rich assholes.
And also relating to someone that she can relate to, because she doesn't have that rich upbringing.
Yeah, and I'm sure she would probably enjoy the downstairs parties.
Yeah, and it's very much new money versus old money versus the person who's there, just the token poor person.
Yes. And then we're also somewhat introduced before and during the dinner scene to real people who were on the Titanic, and given a brief understanding of the level of rich. This is another level of Rose's world that Jack is not privy to.
Yeah.
The concept of one of the most wealthy men in the world at the time is on the Titanic. That's accurate. He was on the Titanic. The concept of like, this is so-and-so, and that is not his wife. His wife is so-and-so.
Yeah,
like,
the engineer, the designer, and the other movie, Titanic, brings that up too. Like,
and so that helps put into scale for Jack because he's, in his mind, I'm sure has three classes. There's the lowest, the middle, and then Rose's class. And in Rose's mind, there are classes inside her class, and she's like, "Look, this is where I'm at. Those people over there, we're not even near. We're not even close to." And
so the gentlemen leave, and
they retreat to the smoking lounge.
And they say, "Jack, do you want to join?" He's like, "No, I'm good. I got to head back down with everyone else." And they're like, and then Cal, of course, comes off and says some snootish shit of like,
"Yes,
it's best you do." And then he slips Rose a note like a middle schooler.
Yes.
Or actually high schooler still.
Yes, because that's what they are.
Yeah. And so I like this part too, again, because Kate's character is still continually breaking away from her upbringing.
She's seen that there is freedom to be had.
Yeah, she's gone down to party with the common people.
With the poor.
Yes.
With the Irish poor. This is very much an Irish party.
Oh yeah, that's right. This is at the time when people really hated the Irish.
Yeah, this is at the point where being an Irish immigrant in New York was not a good thing. You were below the Italian mafia.
It was gangs in New York.
But no, it was actually the gangs of New York.
Yeah.
Like, you were so low that even the mafia wouldn't hire you, but you could be the mafia's bodyguard for like a couple pennies if you were nice.
Yeah.
Like,
or they were offering you no, we're thinking of a little bit earlier in time. People still hated the Irish at this time, but
this was still you were low class.
Gangs of New York was Civil War, where they were offering citizenship if they went off to war.
Yes, exactly. This is we haven't reached deal making yet.
Yeah,
we're still too low. But the Irish on board know how to have a good time.
Exactly, and also some fun side note: the band is called Gaelic Storm, and they play authentic music from the era.
Oh, I know. I listened to them outside of this podcast for funsies.
Oh.
My husband was like, we don't listen to them. I go, we have listened to them. They are on my playlist.
Well, another interesting little tidbit is a lot of the music is heavily Irish inspired because the ship was built by the Irish.
Yep.
It was built in Ireland by Irish hands.
Yes.
And carried many immigrants.
It's a nice touch. And honestly, like, the music of 1912 has a specific feel to it, and it to them would have been modern fun music. To us it wouldn't bring the right vibe.
Yeah.
We wouldn't think of it as fun party music if it was contemporary English 1912 music or even 1910 music. So the fact that it is, traditional Irish folk songs, that translates better, I think. It still gives the same vibe. You don't need to know the words. You don't care.
It adds to the ambiance of it and the chaotic nature of
the party.
Exactly.
Yes.
Nice contrast.
It is.
And of course, the bodyguard is lurking around. He sees.
Being a lurky lurk.
Yeah. And the next part is interesting as well. Again, it continues the class narrative of the movie, or the subplot. Where Jack tries to talk to Rose while she's at church services, which I didn't know this. Every class had their own church services.
They did, and they were all non-denominational on the ship.
Yeah, and I also like it because the bodyguard tries to pay off Jack, but because of Jack's character, he refuses. He pays someone else to do the job for him.
Which, this is one of the only parts where, like, I know why it's there. Story plot wise, it makes sense. There is not a person in 1912 who would think to themselves, yes, this person is in church, wealthy or not. This person is in church. I'm gonna go speak to them.
Yeah,
hell fucking no.
Yeah,
but this does move the plot along, so I don't care.
Yeah. And then
there was no such thing as heathen shopping hours in 1912.
Yeah. Oh, we did forget the drawing scene.
We did forget the drawing scene.
Where he's showing Rose his drawings.
So she knows he's an artist. She's clearly into art. She has brought fake, expensive, real paintings on board the ship.
Yeah, he's
they have something to bond over. They have a similar passion.
And they've also established that he's kind of a vagabond character as well.
He talks about how he's roamed around Europe. He was in Paris for a while.
He is actually modeled off of a novelist, Jack London.
What a name.
I do not know any of his works.
I don't either.
Yeah.
It's a good name. It's a good novelist name, though.
Yeah. And so Jack steals a coat to be on the first deck class to talk with Rose.
Because you do need a coat.
We also learn, or we're being informed by the, not the captain, the ship's engineer, that they had to remove half the lifeboats they already had half the lifeboats to carry people on their ship, but they removed half of those because they were cluttered up the boat.
Yes. And so just to make it an understandable historical point, even if Titanic had had all of her available lifeboats on board, she still would not have had enough lifeboats to save everyone. Yeah. She still would have been like 1,000 people short.
Yeah, she only had enough to carry half the passengers.
At best.
And this is great because it's that human hubris of the ship's unsinkable, so we don't need the boats.
We don't need them. Yeah, this is why we have weird rules and procedures, and why if you go on a cruise, they make you stand on the dot before they'll leave the deck.
Yeah.
But now this is why.
Well, actually, I've never been on a cruise.
Before you're allowed to leave port, every single person who's a passenger has to do, like, you get shown where you're going to stand in emergency. This is the boat you're going to go to. You have to stand there. Everyone does it at the same time. Huh. It is required before you can leave. And they take it incredibly seriously, which is hilarious because a lot of the people on the boat are already 3 margaritas in.
Well, I will never experience that.
No.
I get motion sickness really badly.
Yeah. There's a lot of rich people with a lot of patches behind their ears so that they can be on a cruise.
Yeah, won't do that. So, at this point, we're... Well, there was also a scene before this, too, where Cal confronts Rose.
Yeah, and, I mean, it's mostly Cal being...
a dickhead.
Yes, it comes off as a dickhead. This is part of Cal's character where I wish that Cal could have been portrayed a little bit more like, hey, remember, you're a rich woman who's engaged to me, which is practically like we're married.
Yeah, well...
But, like, I get it. It wouldn't be a good romance movie if he was like, hey, remember, you're being silly.
Yeah.
Like, that wouldn't be a good romance movie.
This is a fling.
Exactly.
But it also makes me think of some of the other Titanic movies. There's similar romance plots.
Oh, for sure. No, this is... Yeah.
Like, A Night to Remember has some of this, too.
And honestly, like... But, especially if you remember that these 2 characters are high school aged, they are young love, they're star-crossed lovers. Like, of course, yeah. This is classic. But
also on top of that, Rose is supposed to take it, so we don't know what else he's done to her.
Yeah.
And the maids are supposed to stand back and let it all happen.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where this is one of those points as someone who's really into history and historical portrayal where it's a blur line. You don't really know where that line is meant to truly be because you want him to be the bad guy. For story purposes, you want him to be the bad guy. You want your audience who is not into history as much as you are to understand.
To be invested in it.
Yeah, and so, like, obviously this is the extreme you're going to go to show that. Yeah. And it will shock your modern audience. And I guess that's kind of a good thing.
Yep. And then we have a big pinnacle romance where
yes.
the first kiss on the bow of the boat?
Yes.
I know my boat terms.
This is the part of the boat where you, for the most part, on most boats, you cannot go stand there anymore because this scene is recreated way too fucking much.
Well, apparently I think one of the producers said up until, like, the 90s or so you were able to do this.
Yeah, you were, like, a lot of people did do this.
Yeah.
Not anymore. Not much of a thing anymore. However, I can confirm, I've been on a cruise that was also during spring break, which, bad timing on our part, but this scene is still reproduced even if it is not on the front of the ship.
Of course it is. So
it's a very romantic, memorable scene. Even if you haven't seen the movie, you know this. The arm spreading, flying scene. Well, the kiss.
And I think it's interesting because this was also done in one take.
Yes.
Because the clouds parted just perfectly as the sun was setting.
And, like, this was their only chance.
No rehearsal, camera just like, hey, go. Let's do this.
This is the only time we'll get this lighting.
Exactly. And
it turned out great. It turned out amazing.
I have a little story about doing something similar.
Uh-huh.
I had a photography project from the viewpoint of a serial killer.
Of course you did. I expect nothing less.
My ex-girlfriend, we put her in the back of a trunk of a car tied up. Took pictures at the end of a road.
Uh-huh.
Luckily, a neighbor called, but they weren't paying attention because she drove the car. So the police called while she was face down in a field, and I was taking pictures.
Uh-huh.
But to be fair, by the time my parents showed up for it, it was like it wouldn't have been right.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have had the right lighting, and I would have had like 30 minutes to shoot instead of like the hour and a half I did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was fun. Police was our neighbor too, so that was fun.
It's always the best to have police as your neighbor, so that way they can look at you and be like, that one again.
This was when I wasn't living with my parents. I was only there for the weekend.
I see.
Yeah, so there was that. But yeah, I mean, it is an iconic scene.
It is. No, it is totally an iconic scene. It is a scene that I think a lot of people think of this as the middle point of the movie because there are scenes that you hold in your head. And I think a lot of people, this scene weighs a lot on them, and so they make it bigger and
they're still like 20 minutes before the actual halfway point.
Yes.
Because now we have the scene that
everybody remembers.
All the teenage boys remember.
This is the only scene my husband properly watched.
Not shocking.
This is the drawing scene.
Yes.
And this is another scene where they're trying to establish where Rose feels like she needs to show that she has interests similar to Jack's. I also love art.
Paint me like one of your French girls.
And it's a cute, mushy scene.
Yeah.
And that's kind of all it is, but like, it's very memorable. Everyone remembers it.
Well,
a lot of it's because of boobs, but at the same time, it's a perfect scene to fit into this movie.
Well, I personally, and I've said personally a lot this episode.
We're going to start a jar.
Arguably so. No, I like this scene because at this point, Rose has completely shed herself to DiCaprio as much as she can up until this point while wearing the necklace that's supposed to entrust her to Cal.
Yes.
And so they he's very professional about this scene, which is a cool scene too because he understands the difference. There's a nice little Freudian slip when he says get on the bed.
I mean couch.
Yeah. That wasn't scripted.
Yes.
He actually slipped, which
it worked out perfectly.
She is stunning. Again, DiCaprio did not draw this. Apparently DiCaprio can't draw worth shit.
No, which fair. I don't blame the man.
Cameron drew this.
Only problem is Cameron's left-handed.
They mirrored.
So they mirrored it.
They mirrored the shots.
Yeah.
Which is interesting too because his hand doesn't feel unnatural because he's like 20, 30 years older than DiCaprio at this point.
Honestly, guys' hands don't age super much. Women's hands do. We lose a lot of fat in between in between the backs of our hands.
Okay.
So it's a lot easier for women to show that. Guys' hands you don't have that problem, so it's a lot easier. I also know that there's some actors who like straight up have hand doubles because they don't like how their like nails and cuticles look. And so any close up they're like, nope, hand double time. I'll be in my trailer.
This makes me think of David Duchovny in Zoolander.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an interesting part. And then we reach the romantic climax. The bodyguard is snooping around. He knows there's some shenanigans going on.
And like the high school children that they are, they giggle and run their way from
room to room.
From room to room.
Which, I learned, again, stupid nerdy accuracy.
He bothered to check if this was possible.
Check if it was possible, and it is. And all the rooms were styled differently from room to room.
Yes.
And so, as they're running through, they make their way to the cargo bay where there is an invoice for that car being there.
Yep, that is as close as we can get. That's about right.
They guess the model. There's a cutesy scene of Jack playing butler to her.
Yep.
Still, there's... And this is what I like about this part, is he still has that kind of in his mind that she likes him, but maybe...
Like, there's a chance.
There's a chance, but if she likes him enough, he could be the butler.
Yeah.
With a little so side
cute.
fling.
So cute. But
and
no, full-on steamy car time.
And as my notes say, and then they fucked. Yeah.
And in case you were wondering, this is the halfway point of the movie.
This is the halfway point of the movie, and why when I got into it, I realized, hey, we have to make this 2 parts, because this is also the point where the romance ends and the survival begins, because the Titanic is also fucked.
The Titanic is also fucked. And so, next time, we will go over the second half of this movie, and also kind of the legacy and the impact that this movie has.
Exactly. So, and we as much as we wanted to stop it at exactly the halfway point of the VHS, we decided, because there is a tonal and thematic shift between the 2 parts of the movie,
this is a good spot.
This is a good stopping spot. So, join us on the second part of Titanic Part 2 of The Good, the Bad, and the Weird.
Thanks for listening.
Peace.